So you see that cool dude up there? Do you know who he is? No, it's not me. Well, woof. It's you. Not that calling you a dog, but it can be any one of you in this room. And I found it was really interesting to listen to Steve Brown today, because I've known Steve for a long time. And he's the real deal. What you saw today was Steve 20 years ago. And very energetic, very smart, very cool, and very savvy about life in itself, much less anything else. And I was listening to him today because there were some things that were congruent and incongruent with what I'm going to be talking about today. And I wanted to share that because I think it's really a meld, to be honest. I think it's important to understand that you have to be true to yourself. You have to be willing to walk off the curb and do things that you think is smart and right. And you have to be noticeable. You have to not be afraid to speak out. You have to not be afraid to tell folks what you think. And you got to get out of the weeds. If I'm going to impart anything to you today, you got to get out of the weeds. Because it's real easy to get into the weeds, and when you get into the weeds, then the weeds kind of grow around you and all that good stuff, and it takes your beauty away from what you bring to the table. So we're going to kind of get into some of that stuff. Can you guys hear me okay? Because I know he was working the lavalier, and I just want to make sure. So I actually, a couple years ago, sat at a table like that with all those chairs filled. And it's very daunting, and you got a lot of people in the room that have different ideas and different thoughts and all those kind of wonderful things. But you have to have your thoughts too. You have to have your ideas too. You have to have your confidence and your understanding about what's important for what you see an organization needs to do to drive it to excellence. Because that's what it's all about at the end of the day. We are hired as HR professionals and HR gurus and whatever you want to call yourself to make people special to drive their business to excellence and to know how to talk about business, to understand the business, to immerse yourself in the business. And I was listening to Steve, and he was saying something about the fact that going out and walking through the people, patting people on the back. A couple of years after I got into consulting, I was doing some work down in South Texas, and I was sitting next to the CEO of this company, and we were actually putting in an incentive plan for his company. And we had all the senior management team in there. And they were getting very greedy about the business. It quit being about the business. It started being about them. And he picked up on it, and I could just see his knuckles getting white. I'm going, oh, this is not going to turn out very well. Because he was kind of a guy that built that company from scratch and became a very successful company. And finally somebody said, well, I think we ought to get more. And the minute they said that, he jumped up out of his chair and he said, that is such crap. Mr. Consultant, you tell me how I built this business. Pats on the back. Thanks for a job well done. Sending notes out to the employees, understanding who the employees were, finding out how their kids were when they were sick, walking the floor constantly, understanding the business, understanding the people, because it was the people who you've got to engage to make the business work. So there's a lot of seats at the table. My hope for you, if this is what you'd like to have in the future for you, is get one of those seats. But it's not easy. And I'm not going to paint a rosy picture for you about how it's all great and wonderful and life is going to be wonderful to you and you're going to get one of those. Because if you've lived in a big corporate environment for any length of time, you're not only trying to do your great work, but you're always having to sometimes look behind your back as somebody who's trying to do you because they want to get your job or get your space. So it happens that way. So depending on where you work, sometimes there's only a few seats. I'm going to share this not as a negative, but as a thought process. I have sat in, I can't tell you the number of meetings I've sat in. JT knows I sit in a lot of meetings. And the interesting part about that is that as a consultant, you sit in a lot of C-suite meetings because we're building comp programs, we're doing all sorts of stuff. I'm also a business advisor. And so from that standpoint, there's a lot of conversations that go on. And it is heartbreaking for me when I have a CEO turn to the HR person and dismiss them because they don't understand the conversation. They don't understand the conversation. They don't understand what they're talking about in terms of the financials or the business or whatever. That doesn't mean you have to be a financial whiz. That doesn't mean you have to be a marketing guru. It doesn't mean any of that stuff. But what it does mean is if you don't have the understanding to have the key and critical conversations to be in the ballpark, then it's really tough to get to there. Because we're supposed to be all about people. We're supposed to be all about driving that excellence through the workplace and the workforce. But if we don't understand how it all works together in a neat, aligned package, then it doesn't work. Sometimes there's seats you don't want. This is actually a picture of a bathroom in one of the state office buildings in downtown Austin somewhere. A friend of mine sat that and he said, these are dueling toilets, which I thought was kind of funny. But if you think about it, sometimes we work in an environment that's so toxic, do you want to be there? Which means don't be afraid to pick up and go somewhere else. Do not waste your time. If you want to get to a certain spot over time, don't waste your time. Do not. So, it's puzzling. Are you prepared for it? It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot out of you. So from that perspective, are you prepared to put the work in to earn it? Because I'll tell you, oftentimes it's not given. And even when you think you should be there, there's somebody that's messing with you to keep you from realizing what you want. So how do you win that game? We'll talk about that. So, no one gets for free. But you can have it if you want it. Nobody's stopping you but you. Because at the end of the day, it's all about what you bring to the table. It's what you're contributing. It's what you're going to be able to accomplish to help where you want to go and do it. So we've all heard all the wonderful stories about HR, right? Are they delivering as leaders? Why we hate HR. I just got through reading an article the other day, and I didn't put it up here. It was a Forbes article on employees and why employees hate HR. I thought, wow, that's really interesting. Why employees hate HR. And I started thinking about that, and I'm going, I can see this. And then when I was hearing Steve today, I'm going, yeah, I can really see this. Because what's weird is that there's two perceptions about HR. We're supposed to be helping the people and all that kind of stuff, and at the same time, they're management. They work for management. They don't care about us. They care about management because management pays their paycheck. And you know what? There's some truth to that. But at the same time, it's a balancing act. So what was interesting in regards to that as well is that it's about building trust. It's about building relationships, about going out and talking to people, finding out what they do, how they get their work done, what's important to them, how's their life. And yeah, if there's 30,000 employees in your company, that makes it tough, right? But your whole team can go do that. That's the whole premise. It's about utilizing your assets to be able to execute your strategies. So, COVID's changed the world for us. You have gone from why we hate HR to, oh my gosh, we need HR to help us get out of the toilet. Recruiting, remote, all these things, insurance, COVID testing, all those things have come to light that the C-suite's going, oh my gosh, what would we have done without our HR teams? The other thing you have to recognize is the fact that when you have the audience, you've got to seize the audience. You can't sit back and go, I'm cool. Life's good. We're all right. Everything's back to normal. And that's a bad word. Everything's back to normal because guess what? Then they go back to normal. You have to start thinking about where's next. Always be thinking about where's next. Because if you're thinking about weeds, not weed, weeds, and you're thinking about all the stuff I got to do instead of thinking about what's next, you're going to miss the boat. So, you got the HR competency model that SHRM's put out. You got to look at all the components. You got to understand how they all connect and align. And all this is the HR side. It's also the business and the strategy and the operations, the culture. How many in here are dying of inflation? How many times you get a phone call every day? What are you going to do about inflation? Where's the money in my paycheck to fix inflation? Right? Have y'all solved that yet? Y'all want to tell the consultant what your secret is so I can go take it back to some clients? No, seriously. The interesting part about inflation is you can't chase inflation. The last numbers that came out were 9.1, right? If you've been checking the stuff. It's on the news every day. Gas prices are down and other prices are down. I doubt very seriously we're going to see 9.1 coming out next week from July. So if everybody jacked all the pay up here to what inflation is at 9.1%, and then inflation shows up at 6 or 7% next month, what happened? Did you underpay, overpay? Maybe they needed to get paid. You know, a lot of stuff that we see is the fact that people weren't not paid what they should have been paid before COVID. And then people said, I ain't going back to work for that money. And people started jacking the rates up. And so there's been a catch up. And then we've heard of the talent wars, right? The great talent wars. The great resignation, which buzzwords drive me nuts because they don't mean anything. People have been resigning and moving around just like Steve said. But the interesting part is that all this stuff is relevant today. What are you bringing back to your management and senior leadership team about how you're solving that? If you think about, for just a second, taking your HR hat off, putting an entrepreneur hat on for a minute, or if you were a business owner, what would your pressures be then? What would be your focus be then? What would you want to see? What would you want to be able to be successful in what you're doing then? How would you mitigate your cost? How would you deal with inflation? I'll give you a tidbit. My phone has rung off the hook for a month and a half now, 2 months now. We got to do something about inflation and cost of living. My house has doubled in 2 years in Austin, Texas. I'm sure y'all's have too. Where are you going to go if you sell it? Nowhere except somebody else's 2 times up. But costs are gone up. Pay has not moved the same way as inflation. It's about 5.6, 5.7, which has been a very steep incline in terms of the wages going up. And this is BLS and all the other kind of stuff. But the key here is the fact that a lot of folks are missing something. What are they missing? What do you think they're missing? I'm taking a poll. What are they missing about inflation? What are they missing about worrying about what's happened over the last 4 or 5 months, when over the last, since 2008, we've been running 3% forever, pay increases, when inflation's been 1 or 2%. So who's been winning? Has anybody communicated that? No. So if you look at a 1 or 2% ahead of inflation over the last 10 years, and now, oh my gosh, the sky's falling. It hit me in the head. Think about, I'm coming back to you. Tell me, what would you do? What's missing here? That's part of it. But on the grand scheme of things, how would you mitigate what's happening right now? What's an answer for, we got to start ponying up a bunch of money? What's the answer? What's the anti-side of that? I'm sorry? Let me jump to it. You're right. You have to cut somewhere else. You have to cut back into, where's our culture? How are we driving our culture? How are we engaging our employees? How are we making them feel special? Because if you look at it from a cultural perspective, I'll give you an example real fast. Worked for a defense contractor, headed up global comp for them. California, moved in Austin, Texas. Brought all the California rates, everybody's freaking out. Not dissimilar to what's happening right now. Everybody's freaking out. People are walking across the street for 50% increases. Culture brought 75 to 85% of those people back to us because they hated where they went. They hated it. They're not innovative. They stand over you wondering when you're going to get your job done. They micromanage. They do this, they do that. They didn't allow them to be them. Some of them called and said, I'll take a pay cut. Just bring me back. Culture, and you're going to start seeing it because it's already starting to wind up in the HR stuff. People are forgetting about the culture to deal with what's happening right now. So I had a meeting not too long ago, and I had 4 or 5 people from this company in this meeting. And I said, I don't understand why you're concerned. And they said, what are you talking about? I said, you guys got a great culture. What are you doing to accentuate that? Well, culture is not going to pay. The people are asking, they're not going to pay for this or not. Wait a minute. If you bring them an opportunity to shine in your organization and they love what they do and they love where they work, then make that work. Just up the ante some. And they did. And I'm not hearing gripes about inflation right now. Because they figured out that it's the interaction, the communication, the relationship building that builds the company. I think Steve accentuated that very well today. So here's the model. We've all seen it. We've all talked about it. It's there for you to think and immerse yourself into, how do I want to drive my career? How do I want to help this company drive their business? And how do I get to be in the place where I want to be to go sit in one of those rooms with the table? So how do they think? If I gave you any advice on this slide, Google up the top 200 questions that CEOs like to ask and have an answer or a thought process about those questions. There's nothing worse than walking into a room and getting inundated with 2 or 3 questions that you can't answer. And sometimes you won't be able to answer. But they ask a lot of questions because they want to ping on what their senior team is going to tell them in terms of where the ship's going to go. So you have to think strategically, return on investment, investment on the business, operate with consistency. Another buzzword from today's at lunch. Culture is a key strategic perspective. You're going to see a lot of companies start to retool and redo their thing on culture because they figured out they can't chase the dollar. They'd have to jack all their prices up on their customers. They can't sustain that, and they know it. What are your priorities? What do you want? Not about what I want. I've been there and done that. I'm here to help. I'm here to impart and think and share. I just turned 40, and it's really tough once you get past that demarcation. I'm just kidding. But see, I had y'all going there for a second. Key question in terms of the C-suite, where's your pain? They don't have a lot of people to talk to. Oftentimes they don't trust who they're talking to on the same team at the C-suite because it's competitive. If you go ask that question, you better be sure to follow up with how to solve that pain. It's not about, oh, this is awful, this is terrible. You got to have a game plan. Where do you fit? In all of this wonderful stuff, where do you fit? People cost companies more than anything else. 9 times out of 10 in the company, unless it's a high-tech company that costs billions of dollars to build out their semiconductors and all sorts of other stuff, that's high-octane expense. But payroll is oftentimes the biggest expense in a company. And all the stuff that goes along with managing people. Steve had a wonderful point today, and I haven't heard anybody else say it because I've done this survey for about the last 18 years speaking to folks like you. How many in here love performance appraisals? Please raise your hand. Nobody. Oh, one? Okay. That's true. If they don't do it regularly. Now, the interesting part about that is that how often from an HR perspective do you have to go back and look at all the comments they put onto the performance appraisals before you got to get the performance appraisal in front of the employee for discrimination purposes and stuff that shouldn't be in there and all the other kind of stuff. How many people are in your company? Okay, 2,800. If you think about it from the standpoint of cost for just a second, and I've got all these supervisors and managers that have to touch that performance appraisal, and then I got HR that's looking at this thing for 3 or 4 months to make it all happen, to send out the forms, to do all the management, to do all this kind of stuff. How much do you think that would be in a $2,800 company? And what's the value you're getting out of it when it's done? What did you gain? And when you start looking at it from there versus the other way from a performance management perspective, where you're discussing and having those conversations on a regular basis, understanding what the key focuses of the company in terms of performance, driving that performance in terms of KPIs and incentives and pay structures and all that other kind of stuff, you're reapplying $250,000 in a $2,800 company to run a performance management or performance appraisal process that your managers and supervisors are just raking you over the coals when you're not around thinking, this is such crap. Why are we wasting our time on this stuff? Seriously. And they hate HR for it. They hate HR for making them do this. And you hate doing it, and the interesting part, and that's no disrespect. I respect you and respect what you just said. So if there's about 40 in here, 1 out of 40, think about the percentage. 98% in 18 years, 98% of the people I've canvassed all hate it. Why aren't you changing it? So when you think about C-suite and you think about all the stuff to be top dog, this is how people become top dog. They do this. We need to change this. We need to do this. We need to understand where the business is going. This is what we need to do to make that work. It's being proactive. It's getting out of the black and white and the policies and all the other kind of stuff and truly getting into the business. How can I build this business? Working the people, building engagement, driving to excellence, building the culture, and all those things to make that happen. And then you got to communicate. You got to make sure people understand where they're going. You got to align them and get them running. So you got, where's the value? Where's the insight? Where's the metrics? Where's the analytics? Steve talks about metrics kill you. They can, or they can be an eye-opener. I came out of a company that went from a billion-dollar company and 12,000 employees to a $250 million company and 3,500 employees in a one-year bankruptcy. So yeah, when you walk into the building and they go, oh my God, here comes HR, and they haul it down the hall and hide from you, that's real. We took metrics, KPIs, we took incentive rewards, we did all sorts of stuff to drive with a game plan to be a billion-dollar company in 5 years, and we made it in 4. So I've seen how performance management works. I've seen how KPIs can drive your business. We helped develop that whole program, and this was back in the late 90s. This was ahead of the game, because I worked for a CEO, and I'm not going to say from hell because I promised my wife I wouldn't, but the game plan here was the fact that that guy was totally brilliant, the most smartest guy I ever worked for, and he was not fun to work for. But he understood all this stuff, and we executed it based on where he wanted things to go, and it worked. Is there an elephant in the room? Am I resonating, or am I just pontificating? I'd like your feedback real quick, because I may switch gears. Is this being helpful? Okay. So that elephant's sitting there, and if you notice, he has his own private toilet. The elephant in the room can be us, or the elephant in the room could be a bad C-suite. You never know until you do your homework. You never know until you observe what's going on. You never know what's going to happen going forward. But you got to be prepared for it. So here's some of the things you have to think about in terms of to be taken seriously. In 10 different instances, I've been in meetings where the HR person had been dismissed from the meeting. It's heartbreaking. And I've got a friend right now who has her master's that's also head of HR for a major corporation. And they're treating her like a dog, which is driving me crazy because they're basically sidewinding through me, and I don't like it. It's disrespectful. It is disrespectful. So part of this is that you have to understand the playing field to be able to play. It's like training yourself. Like, for example, when I was a kid, I loved baseball. So I was out throwing the ball against the steps day in and day out every summer for years. And I ended up with a rocket arm, and I could throw mid-90s fastball and all that good stuff. Now I can barely pick my arm up. But it's a training scenario. It is a getting your mindset where you want to be and how you want to execute. I used to have a video and some music behind it. Things have gotten a lot better technology, but every once in a while I'd get through stuff and it wouldn't play, and it would be really heartbreaking. So I do the Michael Jackson Thriller with this. Because he goes from this really nice guy and transformed into what? The werewolf, right? So that is actually a rougarou. You know what a rougarou is? It is a French female werewolf. So leadership, it's time to transform. Solving problems, not bringing problems and going the sky's falling. It's, wow, here's a problem. Let me take a look at it. How are we going to solve it? Before you lead, success is about growing yourself. When you become a leader, success is about growing others. It's about folks like me getting out in front of you and saying, hey, been there, done that. It can be accomplished. It can be a lot of fun. It can be a tremendous amount of work, but it's rewarding if that's what you want. If you don't want it, settle for where you want to be and enjoy your life, because not everybody wants to go there. Churchill says it takes courage to stand up and speak. You're not going to ever get there unless you speak. You're not going to get there unless you pontificate what you think is important to drive that function and to drive the people side and to help the organization grow. And if it's on deaf ears, maybe it's that 2 toilet seat I showed you earlier that may not be the spot you want to be in. Don't get trapped in the dogma. Don't thinking about what people are thinking or the results of other people's thinking. The key here is the fact that they somehow already know what you truly want to become. If you do, everything else is secondary because you're going to focus and align yourself to make that work. Oh, and my favorite. Mr. Grizzard has been around with me for a long time. Life is like a dog sled team. If you want to be a leader, you don't like this kind of scenery. Sorry, it's just one of those deals, you know. So think, vision, ask questions, listen, discern, prioritize, strategize, empathize. Communicate, measure, analyze, ask questions, reward. Get out there with the folks. And this is sort of the anatomy of the business guy. What we're seeing today, there's a lot of what you see up there, and there's other things that you don't see up there that I just won't put up there. They don't care about what you think about. They don't care about how you live or how anybody else lives. It's all about them. And it's a killer, I think, in some organizations. So this is a deal about 500 plus successful CHROs and what they said here recently in a Price Waterhouse scenario. But strategy first, function second, which basically means get out of the weeds. Second, optimize the organization, not just processes. So you're thinking what's going to drive the organization to the next level, not what policy is going to make sense here. Think about how to move the organization. Third, bring a viewpoint to the boardroom. That means your viewpoint, not somebody else's. That means you're speaking up. It means you're projecting what you think is important. Don't be afraid of it. 4, view culture as a business driver, because that is your go-to on a regular basis. It will survive inflation. It will survive recession. It will survive all sorts of stuff. Because it's what you have helped build in the organization to keep it solid. And model leadership excellence, because guess what? Are we seeing a lot of cool leadership these days? Are we getting modeled? I mean, the media is killing us with all the models of maybe bad leadership, which is just ingraining thought processes. So as you think about all these kind of things, this is their priorities. Warning, be sure you understand what the CEO and the C-suite's priorities are, because they may not be congruent with what you may think they are. Here's some of the questions that I just kind of polled up, 200 questions. Technology platforms, infrastructure, digital, all those kind of things are there to have discussions about. You have to basically figure out where your gaps are in your own organization and then start applying what those gaps are and start looking at ways to overcome those gaps. You have to understand what they understand. That doesn't mean you have to be an expert. It just means you have to understand. That is, on the leading indicators, new ideas generation. You could be a leading indicator. Organization behaviors. What do we need to change? How are we going to deal with remote? Are we going to be a hybrid? What are we going to do about pay for all these people in all these different states? What about transparency of pay? When I've got 5 people in Colorado and I've got 150 people in Texas, and Texas is no way in heck ever going to be transparent about pay. But now I've got another 50 in New York and they're talking about it. So in California, what am I going to do? And I got a whole nother set of things, yada, yada, yada. Regulatory relationships are going to spike up. They're coming up. Anybody in here nonprofit? Beware. More discussions are coming out about executive comp, nonprofits, those kind of things for churches, 501c3s, 6s, so ons. It's a conversation going on again. There's 2 things that can happen with that. It can be IRS, it can be tax court, and be attorney general offices. On the other side of the fence, regulatory ties into what's going on now in terms of all sorts of stuff. Your life's going to change to some degree in terms of how your companies are going to deal with Roe versus Wade. Lagging indicators. What's our market share? Where's our revenue growth? What's our legislative win and loss? If I were to impart anything in terms of this side, for both sides, it's imperative that you guys understand what's going on at the state capitol and in Washington, D.C. Because that's going to change your world, your company's world of what happens there. And you can have a voice, your company can have a voice. It's very important to have that voice. I'm not talking politics. I'm talking what's important in terms of helping your business do the things necessary to be successful. And then work climate. Where do you think your employees rate up today in terms of what they think about your company, what they think about HR? And when you assess them, be prepared to answer that assessment, because once you've created the expectation, you've got to follow through. You can't just let it sit, because then they'll go, that's just another exercise by HR to poll us and don't care what the answer is. Business plan, I'm not going to harp on this, but understand what a business plan is and what that means, because that's going to help you align your mind in terms of where the people are that you're dealing with, because that's what they talk about, that's what they think about, and all those wonderful things. How many in here could cite your mission, vision, and values for your company and organization right now? I can't. Be aware of them though, because believe it or not, if they're up on the wall, your employees are reading this stuff. And if they don't agree with it or they think it's bogus, that doesn't help your culture at all. Doesn't help at all. Operational plans and financial plans, if I were to impart anything on this one, understand the financials of the company. Understand what they mean, how to talk about them, what's going on in the company, and all those kind of things, because at the end of the day, that's where the ones that don't understand it have been kicked out of the meetings I've been in. Anybody have seen the Baldrige Award framework? This is a very simple and very complex. You start with leadership and make sure the leadership's in place. You got strategic planning, you got customer focus, you got workforce focus, you've got measurement, analysis, knowledge management, and all that good stuff. You get the results and you start over. There's 2 Baldrige Award winners in Austin. You know who they are? One, I believe, was St. David's here, was the last one. and Mighty Fine Hamburgers, which was a Rudy barbecue. I can't remember the guy's name. My son actually played with his son in baseball, but yeah, he was a Baldrige Award winner. So KPIs and the thinking process, HR should be driving this process and helping drive this process because you got the reward side too. You're driving the rewards of the company, whether you're doing it personally or part of your organization, but defining KPIs and then driving the business through reward processes takes the performance appraisal piece to another level. It's saying, did you or didn't you? Are you accountable for what you're supposed to be doing? And if you are, we'll pay you for it. And if you're not, we're not going to pay you for it. If you want a good picture, take this one. I got asked to help a company as a business advisor to take that company from a $20 million company to a $50 million company, and they wanted to do it in 3 years. So we took this business, we took that model, and we tore down what we had, where all the gaps were, and then we built it up to what they needed in terms of talent, what they needed to be paying people, who was supposed to be taking in charge, what the succession was, and went through all these different pieces and found out where the gaps were and where the roadblocks were and streamlined the whole daggum thing. And I got off the phone with them about 3 weeks ago and they said, we have taken off. And so we've created new businesses and some other stuff related to that. But the key on this is the fact of human resources in there. Because guess what? Who's going to drive that company to where they want to go? It's the people they're going to seek to come in here and to get the others on board that are excellent employees that they already had and get them refocused and deployed to execute their strategies. And then you got customer focus, top down, teamwork, process ownership, all those kind of things from a process management standpoint. This helps build your credibility in terms of understanding how to make that work for them. So you're going proactive. You're looking at ways to take out those gaps. You're looking for ways to fill those spots that need to be filled to make it better. And then how do you measure success? Define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. Don't drive yourself crazy. You'll know when things are going awry. Just figure it out and fix it. Do you know what's important to your senior leadership team? Because guess what? They're part of the C-suite. They're a part of the top dog thing. They're part of the table. If you know what their thought processes are and you understand what their thinking is, if you ask them, they'll tell you most of the time. But the key here is the fact that you're looking for how you can contribute to assist them, to help them, to drive them, and help drive the business. And you're building relationships as you go. And guess what? They're part of the people side of the fence too. You're building that relationship. You're building that trust with them. You're building that communication with them. As you do that, you become more valuable. You also become more vulnerable. Don't be afraid if somebody comes and beats you up. Guess what? It can be ugly, but it's okay, because you know what? At the end of the day, you just brush it off and just keep on trucking, because that's what it's all about. I had a group vice president one time that was very angry with me because I shut down something that was really stupid. Now, I wasn't expecting corporate to tell him that it was me that got it shut down, right? That wasn't too cool of them. So he was very angry when he walked in this business meeting that I'm fixing to present to that just got shut down. These books were about this thick back in the day, because we're talking dark ages, dinosaur years, okay? So he sat down, his neck's totally red. He picks this gigantic book up and throws it at me. Then he reaches over to the guy next, throws his at me. and starts coming over the table, and I looked at him right in the eye, and I went, "You come across that table, and I'm going to kick your..." And he stopped, and then I got ushered out. And I paid for it for 6 months. Paid for it dearly. It was the right thing to do. I could look myself in the mirror. There were probably 2,000 employees that were being totally affected by this stupidity. And they saw it, and they shut it down. That's walking off the curb. You're not going to believe this, but I got a phone call from corporate 6 months later, which started a whole new career for me. "Hey, Bob, I need you to go down to building X, and I need you to do the outplacement and start the termination process for that group vice president." So the same guy that had made my life miserable for 6 months, I fired and cut him a deal. And from that day forward, 2 years, flying on an airplane, terminating execs. So me and up in the air with George Clooney, I had that job. It was crazy. Executing the plan, line of sight, communication. If I were to impart that. And that's my friend. The heat is on. No bull. You know what BS stands for, right? You know what some of the other stuff that we've learned today stands for with dashes? BS stands for business strategy. Stuff that you should know about. What's happening right now in the world? HR trends right now. DEI. Embracing the gig economy. Pay equity. Guys, you want to be a hero? I'm going to tell you right now. If you guys have been in the talent war and you've been hiring folks over and above all the people that have been working in your company right now, start reading the newspapers and Google them up. Let's see, Google just paid $818 million to 3 employees for pay equity issue and discrimination. I'm sure that's going to it'll go back to court. LinkedIn's in trouble. Some of the others are in trouble, and it is just the tip of the iceberg. I got a friend who does this. She's a litigator and a business consultant on the DE&I side. And I had called her to actually do a panel thing with me in a couple of weeks. And she actually got stuck with a client thing, couldn't do it. But in the conversation, she said to me, "Wow, this is timely. Within the last 3 months, our phone's ringing off the hook. There are more lawsuits coming down the pike than Carter's got liver pills." Boy, and I'm dating myself on that one too. But it's coming. The great train wreck from all this talent acquisition stuff and nobody caring about what people were getting paid, just pay them, is coming back to haunt. So you're going to have compression issues, you're going to have discrimination issues, got all that stuff. If that's happening in your company right now, start coming up with a game plan to fix it. Because you could be a hero if you fix that problem. Dead serious. So, conference board, what are the CEOs thinking about? They're thinking about COVID still. What's the residual on this? And I don't know about you guys, and I don't know how many in this room got COVID. But I think everybody's getting to a point where they're going, "I'm just done with this." And so far, the good news is the old strains have been more like the flu than anything else, but they're still concerned. I can tell you the biggest one that people are really worried about right now, that one right there. Supply chain. Food, which is driving inflation. Cold War with Russia. Cold War with China. So, picture. So I came out of working for a defense contractor. Back in the day, I had a top secret clearance. So I knew some things that we did that a lot of people didn't know people did. So if you take an electronic magnetic pulse explosion up in space over the US, guess what happens? Anybody know? Electricity, your car stops where it is. No internet, no nothing. Nothing. So if you think about what we're talking about now in terms of remote work and all the other interconnectivity and all those other kind of things, not trying to scare you, this is just thinking about what happens when we have a COVID in a war situation. What happens in a Cold War scenario? It's living out in front of us right now. It's like back in the 50s and 60s and 70s right now. We have regressed in so many different ways. It's scary. It's weird. But when you think about those kind of things, all those disruptions causing the rising inflation, causing economic downturn, jobs are up 500 and something thousand this month, which was way above projections. Bet you the stock market did this today. And everybody's squawking about recession. But are we going to be in a recession? And then we got cybersecurity. How many in here get fished on all the time? Constant, right? I had one this morning that almost got me. I thought to myself, nah, I'm going to delete you and I'm going to go look it up. And it only took me once a couple of years ago when I went fishing and it was ugly. But it's every day. So that's just one more thing we got to think about in terms of stuff. Changing in consumer behaviors is scaring corporate America. Why? We've gone from box stores, retail, hit the mall, time to go. Now we're on internet, Amazon, packages are coming from everywhere. We've had some recent break-ins of cars in my neighborhood, and I was up early working on a project, and I saw this car drive up behind my car, and I'm going, man, it's 5 o'clock. Why is somebody driving up behind my car? And it was Amazon delivering a package at 5:30 in the morning. I'm going, whoa, okay, that's interesting. Labor shortage, talent, still there. Nothing's changed. But 500 and some odd thousand people got hired. People are regenerating. They're thinking, okay, COVID's down the path. It's time to get going again. But the labor shortage is real. So if you think about how you mitigate that, don't lose sight of second chance hires and veterans. Because if you think from a logistics standpoint, if you got a guy or a woman who's been dealing drugs across the world and can figure out how to get drugs in any country in the world, think about how dynamic that person would be from a logistics scenario. Think about the guy who used to impersonate aircraft pilots and all that kind of stuff. What was his name? Abigail. And now he's working for the feds and busting people all over the world. Think about that kind of stuff. And it's kind of interesting in terms of where can I draw talent from that I really need that is a hand up, maybe, but at the same time is going to be a good hire. Internal issues. Hybrid workplace. Communication is going to be key. It's really important for HR, just like Steve was saying today. Get out there and start communicating to your employees. Make them know that you care about them and you want to build relationships with them and that kind of deal. Because guess what? That is going to help your culture. It's just like that owner. Don't tell me that you want more money. He, by the way, killed that incentive plan for the year. He said, we're not doing it, and walked out, stormed out. It was about building your culture, treating your employees well, doing the right thing. Cash flow, business growth, mergers, acquisitions, divestitures. Big one here. Conference board's been talking about for 2 years. Leaders have been talking about leaders of tomorrow. Where are we on that? You know, everybody has a perception of what a leader should be. Everybody has a perception of how a leader should act or what they bring to the table. The interesting thing about that is that as leaders who projected those kind of things are now leaving the workplace, baby boomers and all that good stuff, they rejected a lot of the stuff of the leaders coming up from other generations. And they made mistakes and they marginalized them instead of building them. Now's the time to build them. Because the interesting part about that is that you've got a great opportunity to build from a succession perspective and a workplace perspective the leaders of tomorrow in your company. And that's part of the stuff in your bailiwick. So, other board workplace, pay equity, we talked about that. The train wreck really is coming. We are 4 minutes away. This is, I think, the last slide. Let me ask this question because I'm curious. Because of what's happened over the last year with talent wars, nobody caring about anything except getting people in the door, spending money like crazy. There was a company that was spending $100,000, $200,000 on a mid-size engineer because they want to steal him out of another company. No provisions about how to recover $200,000. They gave him $100,000 first year, you get $100,000 the second year, and it was cash up front. So let's say the second year, in the second month, he says, screw y'all, I'm gone. And you go to court, and you win, and you get to go out and collect that money. Nobody collects it for you. So at the end of the day, what are you going to do? It's money down the toilet. So as you look at all those kind of things that take and change the dynamics of where you are, this is the kind of stuff that's happening. I can tell you one thing just from knowing folks and conversations and stuff. This thing with Russia and Ukraine is a serious deal. More serious than what you might imagine. So contingency planning, when you have a heads up or a foreboding warning of what might be coming down the pike, is a perfect time to come up with a strategy plan on how to deal with a global situation. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not, oh my God, the sky's going to fall, we're all screwed. It's not that. It is, we didn't know COVID was coming and we got blindsided. Don't be blindsided about this one. Be aware of it. Come up with a game plan on how to deal with it. Because guess what? C-suite's thinking about it. They're talking about it. They're worried about it. Because they see how that's could change their dynamic in terms of their business. So I'm done. I am open for questions. Yes?
I have a question, Bob. So you talked a lot about financials, business acumen, and really HR folks improving our business acumen. What are some resources that can help us with that? Websites, publications, newsletters that can help us, like people who don't know how to read financials or need to increase their skills and all that?
There's a course out there called Fundamentals of Finance for non-financial managers. It's a really good deal. You can you can go up and look at different terms, like EBITDA, earnings for interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. You can look up all sorts of different things. It'll give you the definitions. Learn the definitions, or just understand what they are. Because there's nothing worse than going, hey, what do you think about where we need to put a target here for EBITDA? Should it be 30%? Should it be 40%? What should it be? And if you don't understand what they're talking about, and they turn to you and say, well, what do you think? You go, well, I really don't know. Then you're wasting their time. You're not adding to the conversation. They want to know why you're there. And it's one of those kind of things. So that kind of stuff, you You can Google pretty much anything you want to find that kind of information. I will share this. If you're interested about the inflation side, and I'm not trying to sell this, anybody in here know Mike Coffey? Show of hands. Mike and I've known each other for years. He owns a company up in Fort Worth called Imperative. He does a lot of background check stuff and that kind of deal. But he's also an entrepreneur. And Mike started a deal called Good Morning HR, and he asked me if I'd do a podcast with him, and I did. It was supposed to be 30 minutes, but it ended up being an hour, and it's 1 hour certification credit if you want to go out there. My email address is right there if you want to take a picture, and I'll be happy to send you the link. But I spent a lot of time and effort researching that before I got on that podcast with him, and it turned out to be a business conversation on some other things as well. So if you're interested in that, you want to, it's a certification that you don't have to, another one, and it might give you some ideas and stuff that you could utilize to take back into your company. So just as a sharing point. Nice question. I hope I answered that for you. Okay. The other is the fact that continuing ed programs from some of the universities and stuff, and also the certification programs for other things. As an example, I've got an opportunity to speak at State Bar in 2 weeks on executive comp for nonprofits, but they do a lot of stuff in the nonprofit world that goes through a whole boatload of other things besides just comp. So, what does it mean to be a 501c3? What do you have to do? All those kind of things. So if you're in the nonprofit world and you want to look at what State Bar is doing on that, it's an excellent course. Not because I'm speaking there, but it's an excellent course in terms of, because I've used, their book's about that thick, but I've used it 100 million times in terms of the stuff I have to do for my business. So that's the kind of stuff. And then don't be afraid to search out different topics like that in terms of acumen. Like I said, Google up the top 100 questions CEOs love to ask, and you'll be amazed at some of the stuff that will come out in that. But it helps anything that you can get that knowledge on to pull into your thoughts. At least you're building a toolkit. It becomes invaluable for you in the future. So. Oh, sure, thank you. Appreciate it.